This is the Dairy Download brought to you by EverAg Insights and the International Dairy Foods Association, where we offer extra sharp market and policy insights on dairy. I'm your host, Phil Plord.
And I'm your co-host, Kathleen Wolfley.
This week's episode is all about cottage cheese, one of the greatest food comeback stories of all time. One of our guests offers perspectives from a longtime player. The other is just getting into the space. We'll get to all that in a minute. But first, Kathleen, where are we now?
Well, Phil, CME spot prices as of Friday, March 20th. CME block cheddar closed at $1.66, up 13 cents on the week. Barrels finished at $1.57, up 4 cents. Spot butter at $1.80, down a nickel on the week. And the spot non-fat dry milk market closed at $1.87, 11 cents higher to the highest levels since mid-2022. Phil, what is your most important thing right now?
I'm keeping a wary eye on gasoline prices. As you know, the Middle East action in Iran has crude oil, WTI crude oil trading up around $100 a barrel. National average price for gasoline as of Friday, the 20th of March, $3.91. And from a commodity dairy market lens, we're looking at discretionary spending. And so if American consumers are spending more at the pump, what are they spending less on? And, there's all kinds of different numbers you can calculate. My back of the envelope math says that the difference between the $3-ish price we had at the beginning of February to the $3.90 price we have today is probably about $25 per family per week in terms of additional cost. Now, if we saw gasoline prices go up to $5 a gallon, which we touched in for 1 week in 2022, that would be about a $55 per week swing from where we were a few weeks ago to that level. And so that money comes from somewhere. The people in the restaurant business believe oftentimes it's them, just in terms of discretionary dollars. Plus, you have diesel prices at super high levels. And, 70% of everything that moves from point A to B in this country moves by truck. And so there's definitely, so consumers will pay for that some way, somehow, even if not directly. And so this energy situation certainly has people asking questions about consumer spending and the overall economy. And I don't know, could be over soon, could take a while for it to be over. We'll have to see how it plays out. I think I'm in pretty safe ground saying that if we see $5 gasoline, that's a real problem. I think 4-ish is a modest problem.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call out, Phil, because as we think about that discretionary spending piece, consumers are already saying, hey, there's affordability issues today. And that's
Yeah.
with this tailwind of lower energy prices from the last couple of years, right? So
Yeah, gasoline prices were like one of the few good news stories out there from a consumer's
exactly.
perspective.
So now people are paying more at the pump. And I think I even saw an article this morning that was talking about just health insurance coverage, then energy costs, and like where do you cut even more? So they're concerned. They're concerned. From the diesel price perspective, we've certainly picked up commentary in the last couple of days just around how much more it's going to cost per pound of cheese or per pound of butter to move product across the country. So you're right. I mean, it's already making its way into food costs one way or another.
Kathleen, what's your most important thing?
Okay, Phil, hot off the presses this afternoon, USDA's February milk production report showed output up 2.9% for the month. My most important thing is cow numbers. Cow numbers were up 15,000 head between January and February. If you look at it report to report, cow numbers were up 35,000 head over that period. That tells me we've got a lot of cows out there. For a headline number, 9.6 plus 9.6 million cows. That's the largest herd in about 30 years. So we've just got a tremendous amount of cow power in the U.S. herd right now. In my mind, that says that, okay, if we were concerned about milk supply slowing as we got into Q2 and on into Q3 potentially, more cows are going to make more milk. So ultimately, I think this propels us to more milk in Q2, potentially more milk in Q3 and beyond, so long as the margins stay healthy.
Yeah, I mean, it's the first number I always look at in the report, and plus 211,000 head year over year. So even if there's a little bit less productivity growth, which seems to be the case today. Um, it's a lot of cows, a lot of extra cows. And so it's hard to imagine a major rundown in production, barring some sort of major heat event or whatever somewhere down the line, with that many animals in the barn.
And we talk about the beef cattle market, fairly often on this podcast too, but the beef on dairy calf prices are still holding together. So I don't think that there's really much incentive for producers to all of a sudden cull that older animal if she's carrying a beef calf.
Funny you mention the beef on dairy thing, Kathleen. If it's okay for me to interject with my stat of the week,
Absolutely.
it's kind of it's related. So Darden restaurants this week announced latest quarterly results and showed that same store sales in the latest fiscal quarter, Longhorn Steakhouse, about 600 of them, 650 of them in the United States, up 7.2% every year. A steakhouse up 7.2%. A restaurant environment that's just so everywhere you look. Texas Roadhouse doing pretty well also. So what up with that, right? And it's really a fascinating story. Americans love beef. We keep talking about it. And the CEO of Darden, Rick Cardenas, had a very interesting thing to say. Basically, the thought was, "Hey, look, if I'm going to have a steak, I want to have an experience. If I'm going to spend money for steak, cook it for me, and I want to have a good experience." And so Cardenas said, when a consumer has to cook a very expensive steak at home and they mess it up, they still have to eat it. When a consumer goes to a restaurant and we mess it up, we eat it. They still eat a great steak. And I've had friends that I've gone out to dinner with at the Roadhouse or somewhere like that, and they say, "Hey, if it actually feels kind of affordable depending on where you're sitting or where you're going to have a steak at a restaurant. It's almost like a little treat. The prices haven't gone up as much as they have at retail proportionately, and so yeah, and retail beef sales February up 1.3%. Keep going. They keep going. Record high prices. And so Americans love beef and we're willing to spend for it at restaurants. And that, to tie it back to the beef on dairy story, you know, continued beef consumption growth in an environment with high prices says that parade keeps on rolling.
I got to ask, Phil, have you ever sent a steak back?
Maybe once for it being too undercooked, but very rarely do I send a steak back. Have I made a bad steak at home every once in a while? It doesn't seem like it's that hard, but I thought it's a fair point, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we have this
Hot
precious steak.
grill, meat thermometer, check, check.
Yeah, and again, Texas Roadhouse, Outback and Longhorn, they're casual dining or moderately priced, chains. I thought one of the funny things that happened this winter was going to one of the big dairy shows, the big dairy show in Las Vegas, the Milk Conference, and we were going out to dinner with some dairy farmers, and you go to these Vegas steakhouses, and I mean, the prices are eye popping. Like for the 16-ounce
You're in
ribeye,
Vegas.
it's $90, right? It's like, but it's the only time you kind of feel good about paying $90 for a steak is when you're sitting with a dairy farmer. It's like, more $90 steaks, please, bring them. And but the average American in the average city going to a Longhorn, happy to do so.
Okay, so I've got a stat of the week that is also something that Americans seem to love. During the 12 weeks ending January 25th, according to Circana data, cottage cheese sales, dollar sales up 19% year over year. Volume sales up 14%. So it's right on key for our cottage cheese episode, but holy smokes, cottage cheese is flying off the shelves, Phil.
I mean, 1970 was when cottage cheese peaked. I was only 3, so I mean, I peaked, I peaked somewhere in the 80s perhaps, but, I'd love to make a comeback like cottage cheese. I mean, we produced as much in 2025 as we did in
Yeah,
1980. Just a remarkable story.
it sure is. And we're going to hear a lot from our guests here in a few moments about cottage cheese. But what is your fearless prediction?
I don't know if it's fearless, but it's a prediction. At least I got half of it right.
Yeah.
So, we'll see. I don't know. I think for all the crude oil situation is real, and the situation in the Middle East is real and dangerous, and fraught with all kinds of issues. But I think that WTI crude oil will be below $100 at year end. I'm not even sure. We haven't even gotten really crossed. We haven't closed much over that level yet. But I think this thing has the potential to die down pretty quickly. So WTI crude oil ends 2026 below $100 per barrel.
The Brent market looks a little bit different, but WTI crude this afternoon closed around 99. So
We make a lot of that stuff here in the United States, turns out.
yeah, we sure do. Okay, I'm going to go the fearless route. I'll take up your fearless for your just prediction. I think that the CME non-fat market, which closed today at $1.87, is going to touch $2 at some point in 2026. We keep talking about tight supply. I think we tend to overdo things in the U.S. dairy markets, and I think that we're just going to go ring that $2 bell. It may not stay there for very long, but I suspect at one point here this year we'll ring it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Price of powder this week was higher than the price of butter for the first time since 2014. And kind of out of nowhere, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
kind of out of
I don't know
nowhere.
if it's a cottage cheese like comeback, but it's pretty darn close, right? I
Pretty
mean,
darn close. Pretty darn
and
close.
everybody's asleep on this marketplace. We make less. Who cares? And the stocks are low. And all of a sudden we wake up one day and somebody wants it and we can't find it. And woof, here we go, off to the races.
That's the dairy markets for you.
If it's worth doing, it's worth doing big.
All right, Phil, let's get to our first guest.
We're excited to welcome Chris Ross to the show. Chris is the Senior Vice President of Marketing and R&D at HP Hood, where he served for over 20 years helping drive the innovation and marketing strategies behind some of Hood's most beloved dairy products. Chris, thank you for joining the Dairy Download.
Good afternoon, Phil. Hi, Kathleen. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here today.
So, Chris, I was raised on HP Hood products in Connecticut in the 1970s. HP Hood has been a staple in the American dairy industry for over 175 years. Tell us a little bit about the company, your role, and Hood's line of products.
Yeah, I mean, so all right, you're dating yourself if you grew up with those products in the 70s, but you're in a bit of a safe space here, so I'll meet you there. I grew up with them as well. So Hood is actually celebrating its 180th anniversary this year, which is pretty phenomenal. There aren't a lot of companies that have been around for 50, 100, let alone over 150 years in today's, high pressure environment. So, Hood has done a lot of things right from the very beginning. And that really extends into today. Like what our company is really first and foremost about is bringing high quality products, dairy products to our consumers. We really take pride in what we bring to those consumers. And we understand that, look, in today's world, you can't take anything for granted. People are struggling to put food on the table, pay bills, and we want them to know that when they buy a Hood product, they're getting the very best. That sensibility really extends through to everything that we do. The Canib family purchased Hood, about 30 years ago. They're the third owner of the company in that 180-year period. And they've really brought a sense of, on one hand, high quality and that passion and commitment to the consumer. But on the other hand, they've really brought this sense of on an entrepreneurial spirit through to us on a day in and day out basis. And we really, I think, take pride in owning everything that we do at every level of the company, whether it's, we're working for HP Hood, we act as if we were running this out of our own house and this is our own individual business, and that everybody does really everything they can do to make our company a success. And a little bit about my role, they allow me to get into trouble with a whole host of things, mainly marketing and R&D. Really, the thing that we've, tried to bring to the table with how we market and how we design products is really, treating the Hood brand and the products like they're something that's very special, and they are. We start and end with the consumer, in terms of how we market our products. And we and I mean this, you're going to hear me say this a lot, we don't take things for granted. We're always trying to really like tap into that consumer insight, that unmet need, and communicate and engage with the consumer in a way that makes a difference. So that's a bit about Hood, and that's a bit about me.
Chris, let's talk about cottage cheese. It's having a comeback moment. For so long, it was the diet punchline, right? And it's having its renaissance moment. From your marketing and R&D perspective, what do you think finally cracked the code for cottage cheese, and where do you see its staying power?
Kathleen, that's a great question. Something that I love to I say geek out about and really talk about at length with folks. So I think cottage cheese just maybe has always been an amazing product. Like it's got so much going for it that just is so good. It's nutritionally complete. It's delicious. It's flexible and versatile. I think people have always loved to create with cottage cheese and make their own dishes, whether it's a scoop on a plate with some fruit or some seasoning, or if it's something is part of a bigger recipe. And I do think that its momentum got interrupted when you nailed it, when people started just to refer to it as a diet food, right? It started to become a little bit less dynamic, less vibrant, sort of took on a bit of a drag. I mean, who wants a diet food, right? And it sort of took a back seat when yogurt had its, moment in the 80s and 90s, and certainly over the last 15 years. So I think that what really led to cottage cheese having the second act it deserved was really when a whole new generation of consumers came along and discovered it on its own. And they were like, whoa, this is not some diet food that needed to be retired. This was something that was pretty fantastic. And I think we can all say at times that social media and, sort of always being on is both a blessing and a burden. But the blessing side of it really led to people being able to put out the good word about cottage cheese. And I think it really tied in nicely to the fact that people love to create, and they love to create with food. And cottage cheese fit into that perfectly. It allowed for an opportunity for people to take a pause and really have some fun with cottage cheese and ultimately give it a second look.
Okay, this is a silly question, but you talked about new consumers coming to the marketplace. Can you take 30 seconds to educate us on what is the difference between large curd and small curd cottage cheese?
Oh, goodness. Large curd and small curd cottage cheese. That is really about the cut of the cheese itself. And really, are you going to end up with with a larger, heavier curd, so to speak, versus the small, literally the smaller, sort of tighter. It also comes into play then around how the dressing is going to interact with that large versus smaller size curd. Both the cut of the curd and the ratio to the dressing and how dry or how wet that cottage cheese is going to be like in the finished product thing really comes down to an individual dairy and an individual manufacturer. Everybody has their own secret recipes, so to speak. And then if you're going to end up with something that's a little wetter and a little fuller versus something that's maybe drier and tighter. I don't know if that helps, but that's the way I like to talk about it.
That's as good an explanation as I've ever heard. We've innovated in cottage cheese beyond small and large curd. Can you talk about some of the biggest space for innovation that's been filled already, maybe? And what do you see going forward in terms of where we can take cottage cheese as a category?
Phil, that's a great question. I think that the surface has really just been barely scratched with where cottage innovation can go. I think obviously like some of the low hanging fruit, no pun intended, around that innovation is some of the fruits, some of the savory options. You're really giving consumers there a benefit around convenience, and I think the promise there is also like, hey, you like to add fruit to your cottage cheese at home, but fruited cottage cheese that you buy from the grocery store is going to give you a different experience that doesn't quite line up to what you make at home. So you combine that different taste experience with the convenience of having somebody else prepare it for you. There's a real benefit there. I think you've also seen an extension into different size platforms. You've got a variety of single serve options, just some straight in the cup, some with side compartments where you can maybe scoop in some fruit or some savory items or something crunchy. And then you also begin to see some dip extension with cottage cheese dips. I think there's an opportunity to really push this further. And I can't really get into it specifically, but we're always looking at a whole host of opportunities to really say, how far can we take cottage cheese? Um, and there's really no limit yet. I think it really comes down to right time for the consumer, and when's the right moment to put it into market.
Convenience, I think, is always a big factor in, making it, taking out the friction, making stuff easy to eat. Anything notable on the uptake on that side from where HP Good sits? Anything you've seen? They're like, oh, well, look at this. This really works in terms of convenience, or any notes there?
So the one thing that I'd say that surprised me, like when we've gone 2 or 3 times back to the consumer with this, is that one of the things that they like about cottage cheese is the fact that they can create anything on their own. So while they like the notion of grab and go, while they like the notion of convenience, um, the idea of convenience sort of rubs up against the idea of, hey, I like to make things on my own with cottage cheese. So there's a little bit of healthy tension there, a little bit of healthy friction. Um, so to me, convenience best manifests itself, Phil, with the idea of grab and go, and you can have your cottage cheese, anytime, any place. That becomes a little more difficult if you want to prepare it yourself. So, but in terms of like just, hey, time saved in the kitchen, yeah, consumers aren't necessarily all the way there on that. Not with cottage anyway.
One of the things we talk about on the show more than occasionally is influencer culture and how TikTok and other trends have helped drive customer acceptance growth. Do you have any thoughts on how that space has unfolded and where it could go, the influencer, and do you think it's made a difference, and what are you looking at there?
It's made a huge difference. There was not a lot of traditional marketing going on in the cottage cheese space. In fact, I will toot our own horn for a second. I think it was really back around 2010, 2011 that, Hood decided to really commit a lot of dollars to marketing cottage cheese day in and day out. And that involved putting it on television, really tapping into the social platforms, PR, and getting out there and sampling it. Um, I understand that not that approach doesn't work for every company. So really the wonderful thing then in that context is that an influencer can come along, and if they buy into the idea, hey, this cottage is awesome, they're going to be able to do that work for you and continue to expand it and extend it and really drive that reach, right? Drive the content to an audience that wouldn't have a chance to see the message otherwise. So I think we're seeing that play out. I think that is going to continue to play out. But let's not forget that if cottage were a bust, meaning if the product weren't as good as it really is, nobody would care. It wouldn't have the sticking power. So the influencers came along and took a message and amplified it just because there wasn't enough going on probably across the dairy industry. But the product itself really allowed the influencers to stick the landing, so to speak.
How does cottage cheese fit into the company's bigger strategic picture for HB Hood's other products and business development?
It's a great question. I mean, it is one of our core product areas, and really, it's fundamental to really the Hood brand itself. Kathleen, I'll answer. And let's unpack that. I think 2 different ways. One is the Hood brand, right, and then one is Hood the company. So as when we think about the Hood brand, we very much look at cottage cheese as our star with retailers. And we really believe in a lot of the thought leadership and sort of 1+1 = 3. Like if we can really drive that thought leadership with the retailer, they're going to work with us to bring this to the consumer. So it really has become a bit of an anchor and really that foundational jumping off point for the Hood brand itself. And it's going to continue to be really over the next 5 years. I think that as it relates to Hood, the company, it is one of I'd say easily one of our top 5 drivers. I think probably like everybody else and like in the industry right now, it's like, and it's a good problem to have. We just can't keep up with demand. And so how do we really keep up with demand in a way that, keeps us viable in the moment? And that's a problem we're solving along with, probably, 10 other dairies.
Okay, Chris, it's the toughest question we're going to ask today.
What's my favorite Taylor Swift song? I can
Ooh,
answer
well,
that.
that's a good one.
All right.
And
New Romantics. I'm the world's oldest Swiftie, and I would highly recommend everybody who has not listened to that song to take a listen.
All right.
So what's your second hardest question?
Okay, second hardest question. What's your favorite way to eat cottage cheese?
My favorite way to eat cottage cheese is on a toasted English muffin. And then I actually get out some black pepper and sprinkle it on top. And I've got really the perfect lunch or even sometime a late afternoon snack. That is my absolute favorite way to do it. Sometimes my runner-up would be I take some cottage cheese and grab some blueberries. And I have a little bit of a sweet tooth, so the blueberries aren't enough for me. And I will take a bunch of sugar and sprinkle it on top of it all. And I convince myself it's a little bit of sort of a blueberry dessert. So those are my 2 favorites.
Well, Chris, we really appreciate you joining us on the Dairy Download to talk about everything cottage cheese.
Was really happy to be here. Thanks for having me, and happy to talk about Cottage anytime.
Now let's hear another perspective.
We're excited to have Sarah Schmidt with us today. Sarah is the Vice President of Marketing at Associated Milk Producers Incorporated, where she leads brand strategy and market growth for the farmer-owned cooperative and helps connect customers with the story behind the dairy products. Sarah, welcome to the Dairy Download.
Well, thank you, Phil. Thank you, Kathleen. Fun to be here. Longtime listener, first-time caller. Looking forward to the visit.
Yeah, we're going to go easy on you today because you are a longtime fan, because we're usually rough on our guests, but we're going to take it easy on you today. So yeah, let's just start with a softball. Why don't you give us some background on AMPI?
Oh, you bet. Well, AMPI, as you mentioned, Phil, is a farmer-owned cooperative. We're based in the upper Midwest. So our farm families reside in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, North and South Dakota, and Nebraska. Those dairy farmers have decided that, hey, to get my milk to market, I need to own manufacturing. But first, a bit more, if I can, about AMPI and our cheese reputation. We do specialize in production of the classic cheese varieties, but also the custom cheese varieties in a large format. So that's your 700-pound blocks or your 500-pound barrels. We really make the cheese that many of the nation's leading brands choose to wrap their name around. And that's a responsibility we take very seriously. And that's not just any cheese that they are choosing to wrap their name around. We have a reputation for producing award-winning cheese. In fact, in just the last 6 years, AMPI entries to international and national competitions have placed in the top 3 85 times. So that's kind of a fun stat we like to point out. And here, most recently in the World Championship Cheese Contest, our Monterey Jack and our Process American Slices were named best of class. So when it comes to cheese, we know a thing or two.
Yeah, I had the privilege of going to the AMPI annual meeting this year, and it's always fun to see various products on display that have AMPI cheese. One of my favorite quesos in these fine United States, I buy just about every week, was sitting right there. I'm like, oh, it's even better now that I know there's some AMPI cheese in that little tub of deliciousness. So you do find AMPI cheese in a lot of places.
It's fun for all of us at AMPI to make that connection and then for the customer to know the story behind the cheese. A farmer owned co op from the upper Midwest. We've been doing this a long time.
Okay, Sarah, so you made mention of a shift at one of your plants to cottage cheese. Can you walk us through that decision process and how you're going to make that transition to cottage cheese?
So it really begins with the farmer owners who have been elected by their fellow members to serve on the board of directors. So those types of decisions absolutely happen in the boardroom. And they're regularly considering ideas, analyzing opportunities, keeping that next generation, whether it be on their farm specifically or just the next generation of AMPI members in mind. And so the decision to transition Blair from cheddar to cottage cheese was driven by market demand and opportunities, manufacturing assets we have, and team talent. So diving into market demand, you both know very well the demand that has grown in cottage cheese. And for us, we look at a few key tactics there. It's really experienced double-digit sales growth just in the last few years. And per capita consumption did hit a low point just back in 2022. That's not that long ago. That consumption point was about 1.9 pounds per person per year. Consumption had been as high as 5 pounds back in the 1970s. So we really see there is plenty of room for that cottage cheese consumption number to grow. We're just at 2.4 pounds in 2024. So let's get up to that 5 pounds. We believe all signs are showing continued demand for cottage cheese. And if we take a time travel trip back to the 70s when we were at 5 pounds in per capita consumption, there were about 80 cottage cheese manufacturing facilities in the US. Today we're at 48 plants, I think is the last number I heard. So there's really this tremendous demand for cottage cheese capacity. We had the asset in our Blair plant to get there fast. So the transition does include a production downtime here. We have entered that downtime. Cheddar cheese is no longer being made in the Blair plant, and we have moved on to the prep process. We are going to be welcoming new equipment into the plant, so there's going to need to be some, layout reconfigurations. Most notably is the difference in packaging. So, like I had mentioned, Blair was making 700-pound blocks of cheddar cheese. Well, now we're going to be making cottage cheese packaged in single serve and multi serve containers. So, quite a bit of new packaging equipment will be installed. During this production downtime, it's super important as a dairy farmer owned co op where the cows are milking every single day. Milk production on member farms is continued to be picked up and processed at other plant locations in the upper Midwest, whether that be an AMPI plant or a nearby plant. Once the transition is complete by the end of the year, the plant will be one of the largest cottage cheese producers in the US. And we know that our globally recognized expertise in making cheese is going to serve us well in the production of cottage cheese. So having that team talent on board and at the ready was also a part of making this decision.
So, Sarah, I want to go back to your comment around growing consumption. Is Cheryl going to have a cottage cheese TikTok going? Because it seems like TikTok was one of the big drivers of this cottage cheese usage. I'm not on the on a marketing team, but
Hasn't that been fun to see in cottage cheese, but in dairy in general? As a dairy farm kid myself, a former dairy princess, if you will, how great that dairy is really having this moment. And cottage cheese is just one of those pieces of our products that is particularly having a good time. So it's been fun to see, and I think it's because cottage cheese can be used in so many different ways, right? And it gets that protein that we're looking for in our daily diets.
So cottage cheese is having a moment, right? And dairy is part of a dairy moment. But one of the other, adjacent to that story is that protein is everywhere. That's part and parcel of the cottage cheese story. But where else is AMPI embracing the desire for more protein?
Well, Miss Muffet reminds us curds and whey. And so for AMPI, if you're one of the largest cheese co ops in the US, you are also one of the largest whey co ops in the US. And so we're always looking at opportunities to capture more value from our whey stream. Most recently, that has been the installation of equipment that allows us to further condense whey into a higher protein concentrate. So, yes, at a minimum, whey having a great moment as it relates to getting more protein in our daily diets. But let's not forget that cheese in general, not just cottage cheese, but cheese in general is a great source of protein. And I think about our opportunities, certainly with flavors, but what about low fat, high protein, probiotic enhanced cheese? I think there are so many cool things that we've only begun to explore when it comes to capitalizing on Americans' demand for protein, and cheese can be a great vehicle there in addition to whey.
Another exciting story that I believe AMPI is participating is the export story. Developing um, appetite for American products overseas, and maybe even some AMPI branded products. Can you talk a little bit about that journey for your co-op?
We began a targeted export program in 2020. And I'm not going to say we were late to that party. We chose that party in 2020 before COVID hit, might I add. We had planned on launching an export program. But for AMPI at a base level, you take a look at where we're located in the US, exports weren't a natural customer for us. But we found there was this growing demand for a high quality slice of American cheese. And when it comes to American cheese, we know what we're doing. We've got the awards to prove it. Specifically out of our Portage, Wisconsin plant, our American slices have won numerous awards. And so we've really enjoyed using that sliced American cheese, a high quality piece of cheese that can be exported as our gateway into Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, and now more recently into Latin America. So again, American slices were our gateway. Now that we're there, we're seeing a lot of interest from retail deli counters for our natural 5 pound loaves of natural cheese. So the cheese that's especially intriguing has been our pepper flavors. So we have been making pepper jack cheese in Jim Falls, Wisconsin since the early 2000s. So we're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. We know what we're doing when it comes to making pepper cheese. And more recently, we've innovated in that space by making Carolina Reaper Jack, Ghost Pepper Jack, Hatch Chili. You name the pepper, we are playing with it in that space. And that's a new variety for some of these export markets that we're seeing a good amount of demand. It'll be fun to see how it continues to grow. But for us, we're primarily exporting to Asia, China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan. I just got done working on a project for a label into Taiwan, and then the Middle East and Latin America.
So, Sarah, that brings up an interesting question around consumer demand. So, you're talking about demand for pepper cheese is strong into Asia in particular. What are you seeing for trends in consumer demand here in the US?
When we looked at where we want to focus our flavor innovation for this year, we came to three specific topic conclusions. The first is weird is winning. The weirder, the better. Heat is hot. You can't be any hotter than a Carolina Reaper, but what could we do to leave a different, even more hot experience for a consumer? And then real food is the real deal. This idea, right, that food is medicine and what type of variety of cheese can be incorporated into a consumer's day that they feel they're really benefiting their health. So maybe that's of that high protein, low fat variety of cheese. So we're advancing our innovation in cheese through those unique flavors, whether it be a sweet heat, a high heat, a savory option. But we need to make sure that cheese performs in a variety of ways. So, how is the consumer choosing to have cheese every day? Is it a stick? Is it a slice? Is it a shred or a chunk? And we want to make the cheese that our customers know We'll slice, we'll stick, we'll cube, we'll cut consistently every day and be a quality piece. So, in a world where food trends are always evolving, we really see, cheese. The demand for cheese continues to endure. Per capita consumption continues to grow. There's still more headway up ahead. When you look at our cheese consuming friends in Europe, we have more opportunity here to keep growing demand in the U.S. And we just need to bring our customers new flavors, and they're going to hit and they're going to go viral, and we're going to have a whole other TikTok channel all about new flavors of cheese, hot ones with cheese focus, if you will.
How does the AMPI group approach innovation? So clearly, you're all these different ideas across the world of heat is hot and food is real. I can't remember what your first one was, but how does the AMPI group approach that innovation?
There's so many different ways, but I would say that we start by being dialed in ourselves to what's going on social media, what's trending. We utilize resources, certainly the dairy checkoff, resources from your team, for example. We're always listening to what you're finding as really growing and changing and the next best thing. We do work with a food marketing agency who's dialed into what restaurants are interested in. They've been great for inspiring new flavor development. But a cornerstone in deciding what new flavor we're going to invest time, energy, and resources into is our cheesemakers. We've got a team of great cheesemakers, a couple of master cheesemakers on staff here at AMPI. We rely on their expertise. You can't just roll in and say, "Hey, I'd really like a star fruit cheese," and make it happen. We make sure they guide our inspiration. Hey, I really think we could do this. I think it's going to marry well with a Monterey Jack. I think it's going to work really well with a cheddar. Hey, we are now producing Gouda commercially, and that opens up a whole new variety that we can do inclusion cheese in a Gouda format. So relying on our cheesemakers to give us some guardrails, if you will. You can get pretty crazy pretty fast when you're only relying on the sales and marketing team. The cheese making team brings us home and puts together a recipe that really tastes great and performs well.
Kathleen, the first thing she said, which is good news for us, maybe, that weird is winning, is I think what
Oh
Sarah
yeah,
said was her
how
first
could I
thing.
forget that one?
Well, I took that like, hey, we could be winning here, Kathleen, just as a general high level statement. Let's close on this note, Sarah. We're not going to ask Kathleen. I'm not a big cottage cheese eater, true confessions, but what's your favorite way to eat cottage cheese?
And it was kind of hard to think of my favorite way. And I landed on whatever I'm craving that day. So if you will, come home with me, we get done. I've been thinking about cheese all day long. I go home. Sometimes I haven't had lunch. How fantastic to know I can go to the cottage cheese in my fridge and just have right at it. So I love a simple cup of savory cottage cheese, nothing added to it. But if I'm feeling like I need a sweet treat, I just add some raspberry jam. Maybe I am fancy and I've got a unique fruit variety I can add there. Kind of make your own cheesecake in a bowl. But for my family, it's in pasta bakes. So if we're making a meal, it's in a pasta dish. But how great that it can be used in so many different ways. So those are my three favorites. Does that work?
Absolutely. Well, Sarah, we really appreciate you joining us on the Dairy Download and sharing your insights and a little bit more knowledge on AMPI's process with our listeners.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity. Always a great visit.
That's a wrap for today's show. As always, we want to thank our production team, Mariah Minnick, Andrew Jerome, and Jeff Cullen at IDFA, and Abby Bauer over here at EverAg. If you are interested in what Kathleen and I do for our day jobs, check us out at ever.ag. Remember, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button, leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform, and tell a friend or two.
Thanks for listening to the Dairy Download. Until next time, stay sharp.